Texas rigs are synonymous with bass fishing because they are one of the producers on almost any body of water that you go to. And it is not a new technique. If you're not familiar, Texas rigs have been around since the 50s. Soon after soft plastic worms were invented, they were invented by a guy up in Ohio. He was a machinist. He wanted a soft plastic lure that was gonna catch bass. So he invented one. Then he ended up moving down to Texas. East Texas, they had a lot of these flooded lakes, tons of brush, tons of trees, all this kind of stuff around you. He needed a way for his worm to not get snagged on all that wood. So he came up with what is now known as a Texas rig. And it consists of having a weight, a bullet weight is what it kind of has evolved to, in front of a hook, and then a soft plastic rigged on there. And I'm gonna show you exactly how to do that and why you wanna do the type of hook for each type of application. So we'll start out with what's called, these are called bobber stops. And there are times when I use one and there are times when I don't use one. If I'm gonna be making long casts with a Texas rig, not particularly, I'm not talking about short distance into cover, like into laydowns, into things like that. I am not gonna peg for that longer cast. The closer I'm fishing, I'm probably gonna be pegging this, this weight in front of the weight, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But just so I can show you, this line is gonna go through one of these little teeny small loops where the bobber stop is, and then it is going to slide right up on to both lines above where the two lines come together. And then you're gonna take that other little loop off, then you're gonna have the bobber stop on your line. So whether you have that bobber stop on there or not, you are then gonna take your bullet weight is what they call these. They're shaped like a bullet. They have a hole right in the middle, go all the way through. You can use either lead, you can use brass. A lot of the popular anglers, you're using tungsten now. Tungsten is harder, denser, so it's got the same weight for smaller material, somewhere in the 30 to 40% range, depending on the tungsten, versus lead. And so they're gonna be, the tungsten are a little bit smaller, and because they're harder, they're gonna give you better sensitivity as your bait is coming across rock, wood, grass, whatever it is that you need to be feeling down there. That tungsten is gonna give you a little bit better feel, and that's why the tungsten is so popular. But tungsten is more expensive, so it's kind of a trade-off. It is not a required deal by any means if you want to just continue to go with lead, but you need to check your regulations. Some states prohibit lead in sinkers, some don't, so just be sure to check that out. But we are going to start out with what is called an extra wide gap hook. This is a Gamakatsu, it's, you know, one of the most popular brands on the market, the Gamakatsu extra wide gap hook. This is a 3/0. It is a good all-around size, and I'm going to put the line through the hook eye, and then I'm going to tie a San Diego jam knot. It is a very simple knot to tie. It is in the uni knot family, and it is somewhat similar to a Rapala knot or Berkeley knot. A Rapala knot's more of a loop knot. So I'm gonna get that San Diego jam knot tied on there. Then I'm gonna cut the tag end off, and then I have my rig, how I'm gonna put my Texas rig on there. So now I'm gonna take a worm. This is just a straight worm. It's a Missile Baits Quiver 6.5. You know, whether it's a trick worm, any type of worm, any of these soft plastics here, I'm gonna rig a couple of them and show you. What you're gonna do is you're gonna go through the head of it just a short distance, and then you're gonna bring it back through, slide that portion up so it goes over the neck of the hook there. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna hold that hook so that it looks like it is, the worm is gonna be straight. And then that's where you're gonna go through the middle of the worm. And with an extra wide gap hook, almost exclusively, I'll do what's called Texpose, which means you come all the way through the worm, then you take the hook point and just bury the hook point into the surface so it's pretty much weedless all the way through. And when you're Texas rigging, no matter what hook you have or what type of bait you have, you want to make sure that that plastic sits perfectly straight. You don't want to have it crooked. You don't want to have it bent so that it's going to twist as it comes through the water. It doesn't matter if you're fishing a bait caster like this Cash and Icon rod and Daiwa reel, or if you're just whatever spinning reel, spin caster, doesn't matter. Your Texas rig worm needs to be straight on the end there so it doesn't do the twist and it can work in a natural fashion. But this extra wide gap hook is what I'm going to use when I'm going to be making longer casts. I will also use this hook when I'm fishing. This is what's called a ribbon tail worm. This is a tomahawk, but this is a ribbon tail worm, and it's going to be the same way. You're going to go through the top portion of it just a little bit, thread that all the way on, look to see where that's going to be straight, rig that right through the body of the worm, so your whole rig is going to be almost perfectly straight. Those ribbon tails are going to help undulate, give a little resistance to the back of that worm, and that thing, you can throw that into brush piles, along grass lines, anything like that. This is just a 1/4 ounce weight. That is a great place to start. If I could only use one weight when I'm throwing a Texas rig, it would probably be a 1/4 ounce. An 1/8 ounce weight is lighter. It takes longer for your bait to get down to the bottom, but there can be times when those bass really like a slower fall. An 1/8 ounce or even a 1/16 ounce can be really good. And there are times when you're fishing a little bit deeper water that you may want to go up to a 3/8 or even a 1/2 ounce weight, something heavier to get that bait down on the bottom. With that weight stirring up the bottom and the bait right behind it, it looks like some sort of underwater animal or some underwater fish or something, jamming at the bottom, causing that disturbance, and that triggers a lot of strikes from the bass. So that's the ribbon tail version right there. That's when I use that extra wide gap hook when I'm making those longer casts. If I want to be throwing more of a creature bait but making longer casts, I really like the Gamakatsu offset shank round bend worm hook. That is a really good standard hook. It has been around for a zillion years, and it is really good for making those longer casts. It's not a bad hook for shorter casts and hooking up with those fish closer to the boat. But I'm just going to go ahead and rig it on there so you can see when I rig this one. It's a little bit different than the extra wide gap because I'm not going to bring the hook point and the hook all the way through. I'm going to bring it through so that bait is still straight on the hook, but when I touch the top of that, I can just barely feel the hook point right there in the top of that body. I can barely feel that hook point. That's how you want that hook to be set up in the bait. But if I'm going to be making shorter casts, let's say I've got thicker clumps of grass, or I've got laydowns that I'm right on top of, close range, that I'm going to be throwing into. You might even say pitching into. I'm still going to be using that Texas rig that looks just like this right here, but I'm going to go to more of a straight shank hook. This Gamakatsu heavy cover worm hook. There's a bunch of different models on there around, but you want to make sure it has that keeper on the right under the line tie there. So once you get you get that tied on just like we tied that other one, you're gonna, with this one, you're just gonna come barely through the top of it, and then when it's on the line, you're gonna bring it up just past that keeper, and then you're gonna measure it up so that it stays straight. You're gonna pinch it just a little bit, and then you're gonna come straight through so that that bait again sits perfectly straight on the hook. And then just like with the offset shank hook, you're gonna pull that hook point through so you can just barely feel that hook point when you put a little pressure on there, that's exactly how you want to have that hook on the bait, in the bait, so that bait sit perfectly straight. You can barely feel that hook point. You don't want to bring it all the way through, and you don't want to just barely put it under there without having, you know, if you can't feel that hook point, you're not going to get really good hook sets. When those fish bite that Texas rig, and you go to set that hook, you're not going to get good penetration because the hook point has got to continue to go through too much plastic. So that's why you want to go ahead and thread that until the hook point pops out, maybe just a little bit, and then you can back it up so that it's smooth, but yet when you push down on it, you've got a little you can feel that little hook point popping through. And it doesn't matter if you're using a craw style bait like a craw filer or whatever your favorite craw bait is. The deal is the same way if you're doing close in. But I will use this craw bait with this hook if I'm going to be casting it, or I might even be using it on the EWG if I'm going to be making longer casts. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at hook choice. You know, EWG is a really good all-around hook, but I've had some issues with getting good hook sets when I'm fishing close to the boat or close to the bank. If I'm going to be making those longer casts, that's when I'm going to go with the EWG or the offset shank round bend worm hook. And that has to do with the way that hook penetrates. As you can see, if a fish clamps down on that extra wide gap hook, he clamps down on it. Let's say the hook is not pointed in the proper direction, and you set the hook really hard, really close. What can happen is that hook can flip around and never get good penetration because it doesn't dig out. It only pulls in the same direction that you're pulling. So you really need that hook to fully turn and be, you know, ready to come out of the fish's mouth when the pressure is applied, so that hook can penetrate, if that makes sense. The difference in the straight shank is no matter what angle that fish gets that straight shank hook, when you set that hook really close to you, you set that hook really hard, boom, you're going to be getting that deep penetration straight into the fish's mouth, the side of the cheek, the top of the mouth. That hook gets much better penetration for the close in, but just it's not the catch-all. I've caught plenty of fish making long casts with a straight shank hook. It can, but the EWG or the offset shank round bend worm hook is much better when you're making those longer casts. So that's why they make the different style hooks, so that you can get the right hook for the right application. So that's Texas rig, how to make a Texas rig, how to put one on, and why you might use a peg, no peg. Talked you through the weights, talked you through the hooks, talked you through the baits. If you have any other questions on a Texas rig, how to make one, how to put one together and go out there and catch bass, hit me up down there in the comments and let me know. But I appreciate all you guys for all your views and all your comments every time I put one of these videos out. So if you want to see something else, basic, intermediate, advanced, be sure to let me know that too. Thanks.